The evening sky was quiet when Ethan Cole walked through the old streets at the edge of the town. The place was almost forgotten, filled with broken stones and empty houses that nobody cared for anymore. He liked to come here when he wanted to be alone, away from the noise of the world. His shoes crunched against the gravel, and he looked at the ruins of an old palace that stood higher than the rest. The walls were cracked, the gates broken, but something about the place pulled him closer every time he passed it. That day, as the sun was going down, a strange light flickered inside the palace. Ethan froze and thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. He stepped forward slowly, each breath heavier than the last. His heart beat faster, but his curiosity was stronger than his fear. When he pushed the gate, it creaked like a whisper. Inside, the air felt different, colder and filled with a faint glow. He walked deeper, his hands sliding along the stone wall. The flickering light became brighter, coming from a corner behind a fallen pillar. When Ethan moved closer, he saw something that made him stop. It was like a doorway made of silver light, standing in the middle of the ruined hall. It did not look like fire or glass. It was smooth and alive, moving gently like water in the wind. He should have turned back. Every part of him told him it was not safe. But there was also something soft in the light, something that welcomed him. Ethan reached out his hand, his fingers shaking as they touched the glow. The light opened wider, wrapping around him, and before he could take another breath, he stepped through. On the other side, the world changed. He was no longer standing in ruins, but in a place filled with soft colors that looked like dreams. The air was warm, carrying the scent of flowers he had never known. The ground beneath his feet shone with pale light, as though stars had fallen and melted into the floor. Ethan looked around, wide-eyed, unable to believe what he was seeing. Then he heard a voice, gentle but clear. He turned and saw her. She stood a few steps away, her figure calm and graceful. Her name, as he would later learn, was Clara. She wore a dress that shimmered as though woven from threads of the sky. Her long hair fell over her shoulders, and her eyes carried a sadness that words could not explain. Ethan could not speak for a moment. He had never seen anyone like her. Clara moved closer, her steps soundless on the glowing floor. She looked at him with steady eyes, as though she had been waiting for him for a very long time. "You should not be here," she said softly, though her tone was not harsh. It was almost like she was worried for him. Ethan found his voice. "I do not even know where I am," he said, his words shaky. She studied him quietly before lowering her gaze. "This is a place hidden from your world. Few ever step into it?" The silence that followed made Ethan feel both nervous and calm at the same time. He wanted to ask questions, but none of them felt right. Instead, he said the only thing he could. "Who are you?" She raised her eyes again, and for the first time, he saw something gentle in them. "I am Clara. Why serve the queen who once ruled this realm? Now I keep what is left of her memory." Ethan felt a shiver, not from fear, but from the weight of her words. He did not understand. But he knew this was not just chance. Something had brought him here, something larger than he could explain. Clara turned her head slightly, as if she heard something in the distance, though Ethan heard nothing at all. "I must be careful," she whispered. "The moment you stepped through, the balance changed. Your presence has already been felt." The way she said it made him feel both important and afraid. He did not know what kind of place this was, or what it meant to the people who lived here. But when Clara looked at him again, there was no anger, only quiet acceptance, as if she had known this day would come. Ethan stood there, staring at her, the glow of the strange world surrounding them both. He realized he had crossed into something far beyond his understanding. His life had already changed, and there was no going back. Ethan stood in the glowing hall, unsure of what to say next. Clara's voice lingered in his ears, soft but filled with meaning. She seemed calm, yet her eyes carried a warning that made him uneasy. He felt as though every step he had taken since entering this place was no longer his own choice. Clara looked at him closely, studying his face as if she wanted to understand why he had come. Then she turned away and began walking slowly across the shining floor. Without thinking, Ethan followed her. He did not want to lose sight of her in this strange world. They passed walls that shimmered like crystal, showing faint images of people long gone. Ethan stopped for a moment to watch them. He saw men and women dressed in robes, standing in great halls, their faces proud and solemn. It looked like memories trapped in glass. Clara noticed him staring and spoke in a quiet tone. They are echoes of the past, she said. The Queen's people once filled this place with life. Now only shadows remain. Ethan felt a chill. He did not know these people, but something about their faces touched him. He turned back to Clara, his voice low. Why am I here? She paused and looked at him, her eyes deep with thought. I cannot answer that yet, but your presence is not without reason. The veil does not open for nothing. They kept walking until they reached a smaller chamber. The walls glowed softer here, and in the center stood a table carved from stone. Clara placed her hand on it, and the surface lit up with faint lines that spread like rivers of light. Ethan watched in wonder. What is this place? It is the Queen's memory, Clara said. Her legacy rests here. I was left behind to guard it. Her words carried weight. Ethan could see that she was not just a maid. There was more to her, something hidden beneath her calm face. She was bound to this place in ways he could not yet understand. Suddenly a sound broke the silence. It was faint, like the echo of boots far away. Clara froze. Her eyes narrowed, and she turned toward the doorway. Ethan felt his chest tighten. Someone is here, Clara whispered. The air grew heavy. Ethan could not see anyone, but he trusted her. Clara moved with quiet grace, her steps light as she approached the doorway. She looked back at Ethan and gestured for him to stay behind. But Ethan shook his head and followed anyway. They walked into another corridor where the light dimmed. The sound of footsteps grew clearer. Ethan felt his palms sweat, but he forced himself to stay close. At the end of the corridor, a shadow passed across the glowing wall. Clara's hand lifted slightly, a sign to stop. They waited in silence as the shadow moved on. When the sound faded, Clara relaxed, but her face remained tense. She turned to Ethan. They are men from another kingdom, she said. Seek what should not belong to them. The Queen's crown still rests here, hidden, and they will not stop until they find it. Ethan's eyes widened. A crown, what does it do? Clara looked away as though the answer was too heavy to speak. It is not a crown of gold or jewels. It carries power that binds the heart of whoever wears it. It was never meant for conquest, but that will not stop them from trying. Ethan felt the weight of her words. He had stumbled into something far greater than he imagined. Why don't you leave? Ethan asked softly. Clara gave him a small, sad smile. I cannot. My duty is here. It has always been here. Ethan did not know what to say. He looked at her and saw not just a servant, but someone who carried an impossible burden alone. For the first time, he felt a deep need to help her, even if he did not yet know how. The sound of footsteps returned, louder this time. Clara stepped forward, her expression calm but ready. Ethan clenched his fists, fear twisting in his chest, yet he refused to turn back. The corridor lit up as more shadows approached, stretching across the glowing walls. Clara's voice was steady when she spoke. It begins now. Ethan stood beside her, heart pounding. He did not know what waited around the corner, but he knew one thing for certain. He could not leave Clara to face it alone. Ethan stood in the dim corridor, his chest rising and falling fast. Clara was calm beside him, her eyes sharp and steady, as if she had faced danger many times before. The shadows on the wall stretched longer, and the sound of approaching footsteps grew heavier. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat dry, but he clenched his fists and stayed by her side. 3 men stepped into the corridor, their faces hard and their clothes marked by dust and battle. They carried blades at their sides, their eyes searching the walls. When they saw Ethan and Clara, they stopped, surprised but not afraid. One of the men stepped forward. His voice was rough. You should not be here. Leave, and maybe we will let you go. Clara stood tall, her voice calm. This place is not yours to claim. Turn back before you bring ruin on yourself. The men laughed, their voices echoing through the corridor. The crown belongs to whoever is strong enough to take it, the first man said. You are only a maid, and he is only a boy. Ethan felt anger rise in him at those words. Clara glanced at him briefly, her eyes steady, reminding him to stay calm. But inside, Ethan knew he could not stand by and do nothing. The men stepped closer. Clara moved in front of Ethan, her body straight, her hands steady. She spoke again, her tone sharper. This is your last warning. The men drew their blades. Their steel glimmered faintly in the light of the walls. Ethan's breath caught in his chest. He'd never held a sword, never fought in his life. Fear pressed down on him, heavy and cold. But then he saw Clara, her calm face, her steady eyes. She did not shake or flinch. She stood ready, and Ethan felt strength flow into him from her courage. Clara moved first. With speed like a flash, she stepped forward, striking the first man's arm and knocking his blade to the ground. The sound of steel hitting stone rang sharp in the corridor. The man cried out, clutching his arm, as Clara turned swiftly to face the second. The second man swung at her, but she moved lightly, her body like flowing water. She struck his chest with her elbow, forcing him back. Ethan watched, stunned. She was graceful and fierce, every movement precise. The third man rushed forward toward Ethan. For a moment, Ethan froze. The man's blade raised high, ready to strike. Fear flooded him, but then he remembered Clara's words, her calm voice telling him he had a reason to be here. Without thinking, Ethan grabbed a broken piece of stone from the floor and swung it at the man's arm. The blade slipped from the man's grip, clattering against the ground. Ethan's heart pounded, his hands shaking, but he stood his ground. The man snarled and rushed at him again, but Clara stepped between them. With a swift motion, she knocked the man back against the wall, her movements controlled and sharp. Silence filled the corridor as the three men, weakened and hurt, pulled themselves up and stumbled back. "This is not over," one of them hissed before they turned and ran into the darkness. Ethan stood frozen, his chest heaving, his hands still clutching the stone. Clara turned to him, her face calm but her eyes softer than before. "You did well," she said quietly. Ethan shook his head. "I was afraid. I did not know what to do." "Fear is natural," Clara replied. "But you did not run. You stood your ground. That is what matters." Her words sank deep into him. For the first time, he felt a spark of courage he had never known. He realized he was no longer just a visitor in this strange world. He had a part to play. As they walked back toward the Chamber of Light, Ethan looked at Clara. "What happens now?" he asked. She looked ahead, her face thoughtful. "They will return, and more will come. The crown calls too many, but it cannot fall into their hands. We must protect it." Ethan felt the weight of her words. He thought of the men's eyes filled with greed and hunger. He thought of Clara standing strong and alone, carrying a duty that seemed endless. And he thought of himself, a boy with no training, no weapon, but now tied to this place by choice. He walked beside Clara, his steps more steady than before. The fear was still there, but so was a new resolve. He knew the fight was only beginning, but he also knew he would not let Clara face it alone. The hall glowed softly around them, the walls shimmering with echoes of the past. Ethan felt the silence press close, but in that silence, he also felt the bond growing between him and Clara. Two strangers brought together by chance, now standing against a storm that was coming closer with every step. The night inside the strange realm was different from the nights Ethan knew in his own world. The sky above the glowing halls did not turn dark but shimmered with soft silver light. Like 1,000 small stars floating near the ground, Ethan followed Clara as they walked back toward the great chamber she had called the Queen's Memory. Ethan's mind was restless. He could not forget the way the men had attacked, their greed sharp in their eyes. He had felt fear, but he had also felt something more, something stronger. Clara had stood like a wall between danger and him, but for the first time he had not wanted to be protected. He had wanted to protect her, too. Clara stopped near the stone table in the center of the chamber. The faint lines of light still glowed across its surface. She placed her hand on it, and the light spread wider, filling the room with warmth. "The crown still rests here," she said quietly. "It waits, hidden in the chamber beyond this hall. It was made not for glory, not for power, but for service. Yet men will twist its meaning. They always do." Ethan listened carefully, his hands resting at his sides. What will happen if they find it? Clara's eyes darkened. If it falls into their hands, they will use it to bend others to their will. The crown binds not only the wearer, but also those around them. It was never meant to rule through fear, but in the wrong hands it will become a weapon. Ethan's chest tightened. He thought of the men who had come, and he imagined armies following them. He looked at Clara, and we cannot let them take it. What must we do? Clara studied him, her gaze soft yet strong. You speak as if you are already part of this duty? Ethan nodded. I cannot walk away now. I saw what they wanted. I cannot leave you to face it alone." For a moment, Clara said nothing. Then she gave a small nod, and for the first time, her face softened with something close to trust. "Then you must learn. It's not just to fight, but to stand with purpose." The next hours were spent in silence as Clara guided him. She placed a blade in his hands, the metal smooth and heavy. Ethan's grip was clumsy, his movements unsure. Clara corrected him gently, showing him how to hold his balance, how to watch, how to move without wasting strength. Her patience gave him courage. Though his arms ached and sweat ran down his back, Ethan did not stop. He remembered her words. Fear is natural, but standing your ground is what matters. Step by step, his strikes grew steadier, his movements less uncertain. Clara watched him with quiet approval, though she said little. Sometime later, when they paused to rest, Ethan sat on the stone floor, breathing hard. Clara stood nearby, her hands folded lightly. "You are learning," she said. Slowly, Ethan replied with a faint smile. "Slowly is still forward," she answered. Before Ethan could speak again, the walls around them trembled faintly. The glow of the chamber flickered. Clara's face grew tense. "They're close. More have come." Ethan rose quickly, gripping the blade tighter. Fear stirred in his chest, but it no longer felt the same as before. Now it came with resolve. Clara turned to him, her voice steady. "Stay near me. Do not let them divide us." They moved together down the corridor leading to the hidden chamber. As they approached, the air grew colder. The sound of many footsteps echoed ahead, louder than before. Shadows stretched long across the glowing walls, more than 3 this time. The rival men had returned, stronger in number. Their faces burned with hunger for the crown. They raised their blades and filled the hall with shouts. Ethan and Clara stood at the center of the chamber. Clara's eyes were sharp, her stance calm. Ethan held his blade firm, his heart racing, but his will unbroken. The first wave of men rushed forward. Steel clashed against stone, the hall ringing with the sound of battle. Clara moved like flowing light, each strike sharp and sure. Ethan stood beside her, blocking blows, pushing forward with strength he did not know he had. The fight was fierce. For every man they struck down, more stepped through the doorway. The chamber shook, the light pulsing as if the realm itself felt the struggle. Ethan's arms burned, but he kept moving, driven by the thought that if he failed, the crown would be lost. In the middle of the chaos, Ethan caught sight of a narrow passage behind the chamber, a faint glow calling from within. He knew at once what it was. The crown. Clara saw it too. Their eyes met for a moment, silent understanding passing between them. The battle was not just about fighting, it was about reaching that chamber before the enemy did. Side by side, they pushed forward through the storm of steel, each step carrying them closer to the heart of the Queen's legacy. The sound of steel and shouting filled the glowing chamber as Ethan and Clara pushed their way toward the narrow passage. The enemy men fought with fierce strength, their blades clashing in the air, sparks flying against the stone walls. Clara moved swiftly, her strikes clean and sharp, while Ethan stood beside her, each swing of his blade carrying more courage than before. His arms burned with pain, but he refused to stop. Every step they gained felt like a small victory, but the men kept coming, their numbers seeming endless. Ethan felt fear rising again, yet it was no longer the kind of fear that made him weak. It was the kind that told him what was at stake. Finally, they broke through the line. Clara led the way into the narrow passage, her movements quick and silent. Ethan followed close behind, his breath heavy, his grip tight on the blade. The passage opened into a hidden chamber, and there, resting on a pedestal of stone, was the crown. It was not made of gold or jewels. It was simple, formed of silver light that shimmered softly as if it were alive. Ethan stared at it in awe. He felt the weight of its presence even from a distance. Clara stepped closer, her voice low. "This is the Queen's crown. It does not promise power. It asks for sacrifice." Behind them, the sound of footsteps grew louder. The enemy men had followed. Clara turned to Ethan, her face calm but serious. "They cannot take it. If they do, this realm will fall." Ethan looked at the crown, then back at Clara. "What must we do?" Clara's eyes softened. "Someone must wear it. Only then will the crown be bound again. But the one who wears it will not rule. They will serve." as a burden, not a prize. Ethan's heart pounded. He thought of the men fighting to claim it, their hunger for control. He thought of Clara, who had guarded this place alone for so long. He felt a pull inside him, a voice that whispered this was why he had been brought here. The first of the enemy men stormed into the chamber, shouting as they charged forward. Ethan turned to Clara. "Let me do it." Her eyes widened slightly. "Ethan, you do not know what it means." "I know enough," he said, his voice steady. "You have carried this duty alone for too long. If someone must bear it, then let it be me." The men rushed forward, their blades raised. Clara moved to fight, but Ethan stepped past her. He reached for the crown with both hands. The moment his fingers touched it, a wave of light filled the chamber, brighter than the sun. The men cried out, covering their eyes. Clara shielded her face, but she did not move away. Ethan lifted the crown and placed it upon his head. The light grew stronger, wrapping around him like fire, but it did not burn. Instead, it filled him with a weight so heavy it felt like his very heart was being pressed to the ground. His knees trembled, but he did not fall. The enemy men froze where they stood, their blades shaking in their hands. The light from the crown spread across the chamber, pushing them back. They cried out in fear and fled into the shadows, their voices fading as they vanished. When the chamber grew quiet, Ethan stood with the crown upon his head. Clara stepped closer, her eyes wide with wonder and sorrow. "You chose the path of service," she whispered. Ethan nodded slowly. It was the only choice. It cannot fall into their hands. The light around him dimmed until only a soft glow remained. The crown no longer shone with wild brightness, but rested on his head like a steady flame. Ethan felt the weight of it in his heart, but he also felt a strange peace. Clara looked at him for a long time, and then for the first time since he had met her, she smiled, faint but real. "You are no longer a visitor here. You are the guardian." Ethan lowered his eyes. "And what about you?" She stepped closer, her voice gentle. "My duty is done, but I will not leave. I choose to stay by your side." They stood together in the quiet chamber, the glow of the crown lighting their faces. Ethan knew his life would never return to what it had been. The world he had known was far behind him, and before him stretched a path of sacrifice and service. But he did not feel fear anymore. With Clara beside him, he felt ready. The veil that had opened to bring him here was now closed, sealing them in a realm bound by duty and memory. But in that silence, a new story had begun. A boy who had once walked among ruins had stepped into a destiny greater than himself. And a girl who had once carried the burden alone no longer stood in the shadows. Together, they faced what lay beyond, bound not by conquest, but by loyalty, courage. In the quiet strength of their choice,